Freaks, it's Hank Balch. We're back in studio with Jeffrey Paquet, our water quality expert here in 2024. And years before, Jeff, you've been with us here for a while. You've been telling the story in writing. And then finally this season, we get you here in video. So welcome back to the studio for episode 4. So risk analysis or, risk assessments, that is not necessarily a new phrase in sterile processing, but kind of triangulating it here with the water quality conversation that we've been having here over the last couple of episodes. And in the context, again, of the program goals that we discussed, that multidisciplinary team, the survey that we discussed on last episode, and now kind of coming and saying, okay, how we got this next step in the process to conduct this risk assessment or this risk analysis. What does this look like when you're out in the field and you're going to make it happen in your department?
Well, the risk assessment is the piece that I think a lot of people are struggling with, going to struggle with. However, it's the most valuable piece of the process. It actually, once you get comfortable with it, you'll realize it's really how you're going to manage and form your water quality management plan. So it's a very important piece. And fundamentally, a risk analysis, it identifies, what's important. So at the top is, patient safety. That's that anything that affects patient safety would be very high risk. However, what risk assessment does, it allows us to scale down things based on the likelihood that they might happen, right? Or the frequency that they might happen. So you might have something that's very high risk. However, the chance that it's going to happen in 10 years at a hospital is very unlikely. So prioritizing capital and controls over that might not be the best use of your time. That they do this all the time in the aerospace arena, where they kind of prioritize how airplanes are designed and systems are designed based on how likely it's going to happen and what its impact is. So same goes here. It's a way for you to identify, particularly as you're transitioning to SD 108 and you're not compliant. So you say, okay, well, I don't control this aspect of my water very well. I know that has some risk downstream to maybe the longevity of the instruments or the functioning of the instruments or maybe patient safety. And so based on how it might impact my value stream in healthcare, you're going to look at that and say, okay, we know we have a deficiency here. We need to put some controls and more monitoring in place until we can, in our goals that we set when we surveyed the system and made our goals, we know we need to change this. We've got a plan for changing it. It's going to change next year. But what are we going to do in the interim time to manage this piece of risk until we make that control change? And so, and basically in the risk assessment, you're going to identify where water is being used, how it's being used, if you're producing water that's purified, how that's happening, what that looks like, and then identify different points of control and where you're lacking them and what their impact is going to be on your job. And that's what risk assessment is about.
And I'm assuming, going back to episode 1, you mentioned that there's been multidisciplinary water-oriented groups around for a while in the healthcare. They've done risk assessments in the past to regards like, Legionella and like those other kind of waterborne diseases. Is that the best? So like if I'm sitting here as a sterile processing clinician saying, oh man, what Jeff just said sounds really complex. I don't even know what questions to ask about like the risk of water doing, like, I don't know where to start. Is that the team to kind of go to and say, hey, I know that we need to do a risk assessment in my SPD. I don't really even know the questions or the potential risk, to your other point. Like maybe I do know the right questions, implications, but I can't really gauge, is this like a hurricane in the middle of Kansas? Or is this, hey, we're living on the top of a mountain that is also a volcano, pretty risky? Or, coming back to episode 1 as well, is this something to reach out to those subject matter experts that are true water quality experts outside of the healthcare facility, those vendor partners, and say, hey, you guys deal with this all the time. I'm assuming that you probably know most of the risk that we need to be putting in.
So to sort of answer the first part, going back to the water quality management plan in the hospital for managing things like Legionella, that will have a risk analysis embedded in it. So if you want to look at methodology, in fact, if you wanted to take that water quality management plan framework and then just center it on your SPD department and basically duplicate that effort, but just draw a line around SPD and say, okay, this is what we're concerned with, then that would be a real good approach to do it. And that has risk assessment, and the methodology for doing risk assessment is already embedded in that plan. So if you're wondering, oh, I don't really know how to do this, well, go back to that plan and it'll have that in there. And then probably the most familiar member of your team with that plan is probably going to be facilities. So I think facilities can be quite helpful in helping you with risk assessment. They may not understand all of how you use water. That's your job. You can tell them about that, and they can kind of help you with how to identify what the risks might be around that. And then certainly when it comes to impact on healthcare, going to your surgical people that are on the team, your clinical engineering people, and having them weigh in, okay, what's the impact and how serious is this? That type of thing.
Okay, great. Well, in our next episode coming up, Jeff, I'm not going to say that you haven't been excited about all of these topics, but I am going to say something tells me this may be one of your most passionate topics coming up on monitoring your water. And this is all leading up to this, right? Because we need the plan, we need the risk, but obviously we need to know what's going on in the current state, like what is actually flowing through our pipes. And do we know this? How often do we know this? And when we know this, do we have a plan to respond to any outliers or any issues that we see? And so we're going to bring you back to just really gear you up into this water quality monitoring topic here. But before we let you go, I want to thank you one more time here for jumping in the studio and, sharing all your knowledge with us, right? Like, this is a lot of insight that the day-to-day sterile processing professional just does not get access to. And the fact that you're coming in studio here over the next 12 months, just lay it all out for us and connect us with someone that if we've got more questions, if it's risk analysis, if it's a multidisciplinary team, we talked about episode 1, or in this monitoring conversation that we're going to talk about in the next episode, they can reach out to you through LinkedIn, and we'll have your contact information, obviously, on the Beyond Clean website under your Expert Series page as well. So, great insight, great conversation. And again, thank you for joining us today. All right. And that's going to do it for this episode. But like I said, come back next. We're going to be talking about water monitoring. And we got a couple more episodes after that before we wrap up this 12-part series. But until we see you then, like we tell you each and every week at Beyond Clean, keep fighting